Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Faces familiar and new. I love it. Thank you for being here. I want to introduce Reverend Courtney Ellis, who is a birder as well as a pastor, and she will be presenting for us today. I want to remind you that right after the presentation today, over at Millie Magoo's and the Fine Print, we'll be having a book signing of Courtney's latest book. So please join us over there right afterwards. Let's begin with a word of prayer, and then we'll have Courtney come up and do her presentation. Holy God, thank you for this time. Pray that you would anoint our speaker. And God, we just thank you for the opportunity to fellowship together around your creation, especially birds. In Christ's name, amen.
Thank you again for having me. It is so good to be here. I'm going to put my phone on the podium so I make sure I'm within my time bounds. It is so good to be here and see some familiar faces and some new faces. Over the next 3 days, we're going to talk a lot about birds. And today we're going to talk about birds and grief. Tomorrow we're going to talk about birds and hope. Today we're going to walk through the valley of the shadow, and then tomorrow we're up on the mountain. And then on Thursday we're going to talk about birds and change, which is something that we all face pretty constantly in our lives. So I wanted to start by asking all of you a question, which is, on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being not at all and 5 being totally obsessed, how into birds are you? Okay. Those of you putting up a 2 and a 1, I'm so glad you're here. We have a 6. Oh, yes, we have a 6. I'm going to convert the 2s by the end of the day. One of the lovely things about birds is I think some people do get very, very, very into birds. My husband will often say, "You were not like this when I married you." And then I say to him, "Till death do us part, honey." But I also tell people, don't say I'm not into birds. Just say I'm not into birds yet. Because if you live long enough, birding will come for you. That's how it works. So we're going to talk about birds. We're also going to talk about grief. And I'm going to read to you a bit from my second newest book, which is called Looking Up, A Birder's Guide to Hope Through Grief. So I love birds. I didn't always. It's new. But something happened to me around the time of the pandemic, and I began birding in earnest. So this is me at the San Diego Birding Festival. You can't see really, but my shirt says Hawkward. And this is my best friend, my college roommate. And her name is Inga. She's coming tonight. She'll be here the next couple of days. And here's the thing about Inga. She's career military. She just retired, so she has some time. So she said, "I want to come see you. Let's go to the San Diego Birding Festival." And I said, "Okay, but you're not really into birds. You know, how much birding do you want to do?" And she goes, "I want to do whatever you want to do." And I said, "Do you really?" And she said, "Yes." So we spent 3 straight days in 100-degree heat birding for 6 or 7 or 8 hours a day at the Tijuana River estuary, which is so good for birds, but the water is so toxic you're not allowed to touch it. And by the end of these 3 days, I was like, she hates this, she hates me, she's never going to speak to me again. And we're driving north to Orange County to go back to my husband and kids, and she's on her phone, and she goes, "Courtney, there's a park just off the freeway, and there's a bird there I have never seen. Can we pull over?" And I said, "Yes! I have a convert." So be careful. It is contagious. The birds may come for you as well. So I want to start off, there we go. I want to start off by reading a little bit of the introduction to the book, which tells you about how and why people get into birding. It's from the opening chapter called Birding. Birding is a switch that flips. Amateurs and ornithologists alike can point to a particular bird that turned the light on for them. We call it a spark bird, the bird that changes everything forever. It may not end up being a person's favorite bird or even a very noteworthy or beautiful or rare one, but it is a watershed. There is a before and an after, and nothing is ever the same again. You have a Phoebe, my friend Michelle gestured to our backyard string lights, where a small black and white songbird perched, flicking its tail up and down. I studied the bird for a few moments, the tuft of black feathers atop its head, its bright black eyes and tiny black beak, its white front and quick, jerky movements. I didn't yet know the words for most of what I was seeing, that the tuft of feathers was a crest, that the bird itself was a type of flycatcher. I didn't know the importance of precision when describing a bird. The Phoebe didn't have a white front, it had a white belly. I didn't know it was called a black Phoebe, distinguishable in color and size from the Eastern and Say's varieties. What I did know in those very first moments was that this little bird had unexpectedly captivated me. For a moment, the volume turned down on my shouting to-do list and clamoring young children and creaky house projects and pinging work emails, and it was just me and this bird. A moment in time, a breath, delight. In that moment, I looked up. The bird up on your screen is called a swinhoe's white-eye, and these live in China, and they live in Orange County, California. Those are the only two places they live. And if you've been a birder for any length of time, you probably have what's called a nemesis bird, a bird that you just cannot find. And you go and you look for this bird, and you may look on the apps to see where the bird is, and you go and you travel, and you just cannot find this bird. This was my nemesis bird for 3 years. It is not that uncommon in Orange County. People find them all over. I have birder friends who would text me while I was at church, while I was at work, and say, I found one, drive on over here, and I would drop everything and drive over. No swinhoe's white-eye. Until about 6 months ago, my friend Mark texted me. I was at the church office, and he said, it's on the golf course, 3 blocks from your church. And I said, the closed golf course, the one on the country club, the one I'm not allowed in on. And he said, you should just maybe sneak over for a second, because I know exactly what tree it's in. So I did not go to jail, but I did get to see my swinhoe's white-eye. And that moment where you are in ecstasy as a birder, you've seen the bird that you've been seeking for years, and the bird is just up there being a bird, does not care. It's this wonderful moment of remembering that we are part of creation and that creation goes on, whatever we think, whatever we say. So this is my swinhoe's white-eye. Birds are invisible to us until they aren't. Or perhaps they aren't invisible, not exactly. They are simply a background to the rest of life, the more immediate, louder bits. Robin Wall Kimmerer, the author of Braiding Sweetgrass, says that most Americans treat the natural world like some sort of green wallpaper. It's just there. It doesn't mean anything. And it's when we start to befriend it, when we start to enter into it, when we seek to understand it, that we are transformed. Perhaps we remember the gull that stole our cookie, or the swans that paddled across a lake we frequented as children. Maybe we watched pigeons from our apartment window, or fed leftover lunch crumbs to sparrows on our school playground. But mostly, birds were not really a thing. And then one day, out of nowhere, the spark. Perhaps you have a spark bird of your own, a great egret, or black rail, or indigo bunting, a tall, spindly flamingo, or a tiny, buzzy hummingbird. Maybe you're contemplating putting this book down because you wanted to read about hope and grief, and here I am yammering on about birds, which is not what you thought you signed up for. But here's the thing. Illumination is inscribed on every page of creation. Chanting aloft in the pine tops, wrote the poet Robert Service, the wind has a lesson to teach. In his first letter to the Thessalonians, Paul writes that we do not grieve like those who have no hope, for we believe that Jesus died and rose again. These holy reminders come to us through Scripture, but that is not their only place of speech. The natural world pulses with the heartbeat of God, and birds are a unique avenue into this understanding. Look at the birds, Jesus tells the crowds up on the mountainside, and one by one the people look up. And Jesus begins to show each soul its dignity and value and worth. In the book of Exodus, Moses is hard at work herding his father-in-law Jethro's sheep. Anyone who has worked for an in-law knows that the pressure is on to do the job well. As Moses and his sheep meander through the wilderness, Moses' eyes are tuned, on the lookout for pitfalls and predators. He's hoping to spot a lush patch of grass or two when his attention is diverted by a strange sight. There, over in the chaparral, is a bush aflame. Small fires are not unusual in this parched land of heat and scrub and lightning, but Moses is drawn closer by a realization this bush is burning, yet it is not consumed. The fire does not spread, nor does it go out. It burns and burns and burns. "Take off your shoes," comes a voice, "for the ground upon which you stand is holy." There is a before and an after. There is a spark and a burning. In this moment, Moses is set upon a path from which he will never return, a journey that will have its end decades beyond and hundreds of miles away from this small patch of holy ground. Rare are the moments in our lives where we can point to a before and an after. There are graduations and marriages and births, accidents and illnesses and deaths. But mostly there are long strings of ordinary days, one after the other after the other. We wake and sleep, we eat and work, we play and rest. Everything is pretty much the same until it isn't. After the burning bush, Moses will face months of wrangling with the great Pharaoh of Egypt. There will be a pillar of cloud and a pillar of fire and a miraculous crossing of the Red Sea. This will be followed by decades of wandering in the wilderness. A few transcendent moments will give way to 40 years of slogging obedience. Yet God will plant reminders of his presence along this arduous journey. Bread from heaven, water from a stone, quail to nourish the body. God will speak to Moses. God will appear to him. God will continue to guide. Even in the slog, there is hope. Many years before Moses, God pulled Abraham from his tents in the dead of night and called him to the edge of his camp. "Look up," God told Abraham. "Look at the stars." In the Gospels, Jesus sees the fear and anxiety of the crowds and points them heavenward too. "Look at the birds," says Jesus. "Are you not worth more than many sparrows?" Every year or so, my husband Daryl and I take the kids on a whale watching tour from a marina near our home. Inevitably, a tourist or two will get seasick, even in calm waters. Then the captain will tell them to keep their eyes on the horizon. It's turned into a spiritual metaphor for me. The boat will go up and down, up and down, up and down our whole life long. But if we keep our eyes up, we can catch a glimpse of salvation. I'm not a professional birder or even an impressive amateur one. I feel the need to mention this at the outset because I'm no ornithologist or biologist or expert in the ways of the avian world. This will not be a field guide to the birds of Southern California or an extensive exploration of ecology or even a big year type chronicle of the species I've encountered. At least one chapter in this book describes a bird I have never even seen in person. My only qualifications for the birdy parts of this book are a deep fascination with all things avian and an even deeper love. I love birds. So the book begins with this frame of why birds. It was not originally how the book was going to start. I was going to start with a chapter on death and vultures. And my husband, Daryl, my wonderful, brilliant husband, Daryl, PhD in theology, he is as smart as the sky is big. He reads my first drafts, and he read it, and he said, "Oh, honey, don't start like that. Nobody wants that." And so we start with a gentler introduction into the love of birds, and then chapter 2 is death and vultures. But I think it's a really vulnerable thing to write in a book or stand in front of people and say, "I just love this. I just love birds." And maybe for you it's not birds. Maybe for you it's baking sourdough or it's model trains or it's seeing your grandkids. But We live in a really cynical society, so I think there's something beautiful about being able to say, I just love this. And I'm not an expert, but you also learn particular things about a subject by loving it. I would learn different things if I got a PhD in ornithology than I do by just sitting in my yard and soaking in the love of birds. I have a podcast called The Thing with Feathers. We recorded an episode here yesterday, and what I love is I bring on ornithologists and I learn so much from them, but I also bring on poets who talk about birds because we learn different things about birds from poets. And I bring on pastors who love birds, and we learn different things about birds from pastors. So those are my qualifications or non-qualifications. But one of the interesting things I find about birds is the more I talk to people about birds, learn about birds, read about birds, the more the same story keeps coming to the forefront, which is that when people first got invested in birds, started to fall in love with birds, it was often during a season of grief. And many people first begin birding because of a time of difficulty or sadness in their lives. It's when their spouse died. It's when their cancer returned. It's when they lost their job. That grief and birding are very connected. During the global pandemic, I don't know if you guys remember that. We had this global pandemic like 6 years ago. Yeah, we've all tried to forget. But sales of bird seed, bird feeders, and binoculars went through the roof because people were home, and for the first time, many of them were actually looking out the window. So even in seasons of grief, there are unique gifts. So what is grief? Grief is an emotional response to a difficult change. We think of grief most often when we think of death. Losing a loved one to death brings great grief. But we also have small griefs in our lives. Have you ever had the experience of waiting in a long line for an ice cream cone and thinking about your flavor and picking it out and paying for it and walking outside and getting a little jostled, and there it goes? And like you could practically taste it. It's a small grief. And we are a people of grief. We are a people marked by griefs, big and small. We walk through this veil of tears, and yet we are not a people, we are not a culture that grieves well. We are not a culture that's good at making space for grief. Does anyone know in America how many days off of work you're offered for the death of a spouse at a typical company? 3 days. The shock hasn't even worn off. It's inhumane. It's the rest of the world thinks we're nuts. We are not a culture that grieves well. We're not a culture that is sure what to do with grief, how to hold it, how to care for one another within it. I write a lot about grief in this book, and I'm going to talk more specifically about my particular grief. But first, this is from a chapter on grief. I want to read just 2 short pages on some definitions. Every person is grieving. Every person in our pews, every person on our highways, in our supermarkets, at our offices and schools, each person on your street, in your home. We will each experience seasons of more acute grief, the death of a loved one, the loss of a job or a dream, a natural disaster or house fire or health crisis. But we walk through small, simmering, chronic griefs every single day. It is the water we swim in, the air we breathe. To live is to experience loss. To love is to experience it all the more. Yet many of us add guilt to our grief. We shove it down or away, telling ourselves we should be fine, should move on. Parishioners regularly shed tears with me about the death of a cat or a dog, and then they apologize. I know it's just a pet, they'll say. Yet pets weave their way into the fabric of our families. Poet Scott Cairns, who, if you don't know Scott Cairns, he's a Greek Orthodox poet, and his books are beautiful. Poet Scott Cairns begins his short book, The End of Suffering, with a reflection on burying his dogs. He writes, "The graves of 2 dogs may seem to some to be a relatively poor starting point, maybe even to some an insulting starting point for this sort of inquiry. I hope not. I would never mean to equate the loss of a dog, or even the loss of two very good dogs, with every other occasion of human suffering. Still, I will not discount how hard, how sharp even this loss remains, and how puzzling. It's the puzzlement, frankly, that makes even this current specific grief remind me more generally of other grief, of other painful occasions, and of our overall predicament. In any case, as I shovel and as I weep over my big, sweet dogs, I wince off and on, a little embarrassed that in a world where each newscast and newspaper brings new images of heart-wrenching human tragedy, I continue to be so broken up over losing my dogs. My only defense for the moment will have to be that these really were extraordinarily good dogs. We need not weigh our grief on a cosmic scale, comparing it with the sadness of others or minimizing it in light of the world's many sufferings. Instead, we are invited to feel it, to sit with it, to notice and wrestle and befriend it, to set it aside and pick it back up again. There are shared patterns, but ultimately grief is individual. Every person must journey through on their own. There is no reason to interrogate our tears. As Madeleine L'Engle notes, men wept freely before too much civilization taught them that tears were unmanly. I have sought to curtail my own tears because they risk looking unprofessional or, a particularly feminine fear, hysterical. A quick tear slipping down the cheek is dignified. A flood of them unsettles people. Yet grief will not be tamed. We can shirk it, but be certain it will come out in other ways: anger, bitterness, depression, an all-out nervous breakdown, or we can expose it to light and air, being patient with ourselves all the while. Grieving takes the time that it takes. It does not like to be hurried. For those of us prone to rushing, the achievers or speedsters or restless types, this is a hard lesson. The only way out is through, and through will take time. So I wanted to ask, and no pressure to share if you don't want to, but is anyone in the room grieving something today, something you can share in just a couple words or a sentence? What are you grieving in this season? Some griefs are very tender and very personal. Yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily say he was a good dog. I think one of the things I loved the most about him was that he was kind of mischievous. But Gus, I just can't get over his death.
Yeah.
And sometimes I feel bad when I forget. But I think we find ways to support ourselves. We fashion society or a culture because this is something every single person on earth shares. It's really the only thing I can think of. Maybe if we were more open about it, we all get along a little better too. So
There's something to that. Yeah. Remembering Gus, the dog. Anybody else, something you're grieving? Well, I am sticking around after if you want to talk. But I know griefs can be very personal. In our house, just recently, so recent I didn't even put a slide up, I have 3 children, 7, 10, and 13, and the 10-year-old has 2 pet mice that he just dotes on. And I don't like rodents, and I don't like rodents in the house. But he has taken such tender care of them that they have lived much longer than they should have, according to the pet store. And I came home from a recent speaking engagement and walked in the house and said, "Oh, buddy, it's time to clean the mouse cage." And he came running back into the room in tears. That Jules, he named them Diamonds and Jules. That's how much he loves these mice. That Jules had died. And so we had a mouse funeral in the backyard. And I had a professor in college who would often say, you have to buy your kids hamsters because they need to learn about death on a micro level before they learn about it on a macro level. And it brought up so many questions about theodicy and things like that. So anyway, we have a cross in the backyard under the nectarine tree for Jules. So I began birding during the pandemic, as so many people did. I've only been doing this hardcore for about 6 years. It's a common story. But as soon as I started birding in earnest, I got a text message from my parents, and they said, this is me in my younger years, that's my husband Daryl over there before he grew a giant beard, my grandmother up top, and my grandfather. It was near the end of the first year of the pandemic, and I got a text message from my mom saying, your grandpa fell. And you know that's often the beginning of a long story. Your grandpa fell, and they took him to the hospital, and the doctor says he probably only has a couple months to live. My grandfather was 89 years old at this point, and he had had a good long life, and yet none of us were ready for this. And so I got this text message actually when I was out on a bird walk. I was out on the trails near my home, and I immediately texted my husband and told him what I had learned. And I just had this sense, the doctor says it's going to be 2 months, but I feel like it's going to be much faster than that. I think I need to go home. And I'm telling this to my husband, who is also a pastor, and it is the day before Holy Week begins. We pastor a fairly large church. There are 3 of us pastors on staff. Our senior pastor was on vacation, and so I was asking my husband to start off Holy Week without me, with 3 young children who were going to be on spring break. It was a big ask. And there was no delay. I got a response immediately. He said, you do what you need to do. And so I booked a ticket. My grandfather spent most of his life in Chicago, and then he moved to northern Wisconsin, and he was a complicated man. He was a grumpy sort. He was hermit adjacent, we describe him. And he moved up to the North Woods because after many, many years of working very hard in the city, he was kind of done with people. And so he and my grandma lived on the shores of Lower Cobbochine Lake in Hazelhurst, Wisconsin. And in my childhood years, after he had retired, that home became a haven for me. It became a place where I learned about the natural world. And my grandfather was not one for books, so he taught me all the wrong names for all the woodland creatures. The goldfinches were canaries. He had his own language for everything. But he was a fisherman and a lover of the outdoors and a man of few words. And I'm an introvert in a family of extroverts, so he and I got along great. I would sit next to him as he would cast his line into the water of his lake, trying to fish for dinner, and just feel something in my soul settle down. And so because of the pandemic, we hadn't seen each other recently, and I got on that airplane. And then the rest of the story began to unfold. I had already started writing this book, looking up about birds, but it didn't have a frame for it. And as I flew home, I started to realize maybe the frame for a book about birds is a book that's about grief, too. And as a pastor, I minister to people in grief. I'm at the hospital all the time. I do funerals and things like this. And so I'm kind of a grief expert. I worked for hospice before I was a minister. And yet, when it's the person who rocked you when you were a baby, the grief hits differently. It's not professional grief anymore. And so I started heading home. This is page... I was actually going to read something different, but I'm going to move us along a little bit about how we experience grief and what it is to work with grievers professionally versus personally. And I expect many of you, if you work in healthcare or if you work in ministry, there is that kind of divide. I've been with my current church for 12 years now. My husband and I have both been on staff. And those first few funerals when we showed up 12 years ago were pretty easy. You heard the stories about this person. You knew they were an amazing person. You did a funeral service. But now we're burying friends. And part of the role as a minister is to hold it together up front so that everyone else can hold it together and then go cry in your car after. When I'm called to the bedside of an ailing congregant, sometimes I don't arrive before they die. People go out on their own terms at the end, often much more quickly or slowly than their doctors or spouses or nurses expect, especially when death has been anticipated, the cancer's returned, or the lungs are failing, or the heart has reached the end of its strength. People still, it seems, have agency in their final days and hours. They let go and accept death's journey quickly while alone in their room, wanting to spare their spouse the anguish of watching the final moments, or they hold on, waiting for spring, for an anniversary, for an estranged daughter or son to come and say goodbye. Daryl and I witnessed a beloved mentor stave off death against all medical odds until the Cubs won the World Series. People are themselves until the very end. Grief shapes us. How we respond to grief shapes us too. We may share it or stuff it down, navigate it, or listen to it or run from it, but none of us will escape its effects. Grief is like water in a cup filled to the brim. If we set that cup gently on a shelf, little by little, the water will evaporate. There may be days we can take a sip or two and discover it isn't all bitterness. Or we can pretend the cup is empty, pick it up carelessly, and watch it slosh all over everything while telling ourselves we aren't all wet. A few months into the pandemic, Daryl found me standing at the end of our driveway, tearing through the newspaper, a tornado of black and white pages sputtering across the sidewalk. "There is no crossword," I hissed, grabbing at the strewn mess, crumpling it into a giant ball, and storming over to the recycling bin. I needed the crossword. When I saw him stop midway down the front walk, kindness and concern etched in his face, my anger turned to hot tears that I dashed away with the back of my hand. I moved immediately to apology. How unseemly for one of the neighborhood pastors to be throwing newspapers around in her bathrobe on a Sunday morning. I told Daryl I didn't know what had gotten into me, that maybe I needed a little more sleep or to go for a walk, because it wasn't like anything was actually wrong. It was the beginning of the pandemic, but we were living a white-collar quarantine. We were safe, supplied, healthy for now. I see now that I was grieving. We all were. We all are. So the book is arranged with different chapters covering big themes like death and grief and hope. And those big themes are paired with an appropriate bird. So the chapter on death is paired with vultures. I love vultures. I consider myself a vulture apologist. And then there's a chapter on uncertainty. And I paired uncertainty with, anyone want to guess what bird? What's an uncertain sort of a bird? It's not vultures, that one's taken. You only have 10,999 more species. I pair uncertainty with mockingbirds. This is a northern mockingbird. You guys have these around. They're not super common here, but they are around. They can mimic so many other birds, but they can also mimic different sounds. The one in our backyard does ambulance siren. They're amazing. They can do pogo stick. They can sometimes do voices. Mockingbirds are astonishing, and so I paired them with a chapter on uncertainty because when you encounter a mockingbird, you never know what you're going to get. So uncertainty and mockingbirds. And I think when we're in seasons of grief, uncertainty can become really, really scary. And there can also be unique gifts in a season of uncertainty. So here's the story, begins my story of grief. My phone lights up with a text. It's my parents. The doctor says Grandpa only has 2 months to live. I slip it into my pocket and continue my walk, straining out the few details I have from oceans of unknowing, struggling to listen to the quiet voice of God and the cacophony of my own soul. Today is the day before Palm Sunday. The next 8 days will include exactly 6 services at our church and approximately 10,000 details. It's basically final exams week, but we aren't 20 years old anymore, so the all-nighters hurt like fire, and we can't get by on takeout burritos and Mountain Dew and expect to live. The kids are already asking why we aren't traveling for spring break when such and such friend went to Maui and such other friend went to Mexico, and we say, haha, but you get to go to Netflix. They are not amused. There's no way I can leave Daryl in the midst of all that needs to be done. But the voice, not of God, but of a beloved literature professor floats through my mind. There's work and there's life, she told me many years ago. mentioning she was going on sabbatical to help care for her grandkids. This is life. Between my time as a chaplain and my 12 years and counting as an ordained minister, it's 15 now, I've held the hand of dozens upon dozens of dying men and women. There is no precise way to predict the pace at which a person's life reaches its end. A diagnosis of 2 months can turn into 3 years of thriving. People get kicked out of hospice for being too healthy. I've seen it. Hopeless cases revive. But I've also witnessed people die so quickly and unexpectedly that their spouse was still in the hospital lobby waiting for the elevator. Death can be capricious. It can come without any warning, an accident, a sudden turn for the worse, a phone call in the night. Or it can come after a long series of peaks and valleys, wrenching loved ones from hope to despair and back again in a long, slow grind. There is often no way to tell. I wish there was a method to ascertain how much time my grandfather has left, whether I should drop everything and fly back to the Midwest right now or wait until the other side of Easter, or simply see him in 3 months when we'll be back during our annual summer visit with the tickets that we've already booked. I'm surprised at the magnetic pull of kinship in this new difficult news. But then Grandpa and I have always had a special bond. He's an introvert's introvert, a lover of fishing and bird watching and silence. He decided he approved of Daryl when in the very first year of our marriage, Daryl drove him 6 hours home from Chicago without ever asking to turn on the radio. If I leave for Wisconsin, Daryl will parent our children alone during the busiest week of the church year. They're amazing kids, empathetic and sweet and kind and silly, but they're also just 6 and 9 and 3 years old, with needs that can overwhelm the two of us on a normal week. I have no doubt he'd take it on if I asked, but what if I rush home tomorrow when a visit next week would have been just fine? 2 months is a long time, if it is 2 months. I don't know what to do. When faced with uncertainty, we often engage in fear responses, fight or flight, fawn or freeze. I'm a freezer, shutting down until I've had time to weigh all the options, to chart a course, to make a plan. Birds tend to respond to uncertainty with flight. It's in their nature, after all. Winged creatures gotta wing, but not mockingbirds. Mockingbirds are fighters. They are willing to take on birds much larger than themselves to protect their young or themselves, or just to cause a ruckus. They're the wild partiers of the bird world, the unhinged neighbors. Mockingbirds are the second cousins that show up at every family event with a story that shouldn't be shared in the presence of children. Ghosts, sexcapades, a wonderful new business proposition. They do not care who they bother, drown out, or inconvenience. You never know what's going to come out of their mouths, except it will probably be a lot. Mockingbirds mimic hundreds of other birds' songs, often at top volume and occasionally even through the night, especially single males who love a full moon. There's one sitting on the peak of our neighbor's roof as I type this, a different home than the one favored by our neighborhood vultures. And every time our humble house finches begin piping up to sing, the mockingbird starts his piercing repertoire anew. Today it's a mixtape of mountain chickadee, house sparrow, crow, gull, lesser goldfinch, and ambulance siren. He's cycling through it for the 5th time. They get a playlist. If you listen to a mockingbird, they will go over and over. It's like the CDs on repeat. The finches seem nonplussed, but as I said, he doesn't care. It's mating season, and he's showing up his equivalent of a sports car. Our northern mockingbird, Mimus polyglottus, the only variety in North America, flips and flashes his white wing patches, a behavior ornithologists can't find any real reason for, except that it keeps with the general mockingbird persona of being very extra. In the 4-letter birding codes used by ornithologists for research purposes like banding and bird surveys, northern mockingbirds are known as NOMO, no mo. Though these codes can seem almost whimsical, the Lincoln sparrow is a lisp, the purple martin a puma, the tufted titmouse a tootie. They most commonly just come from the first letters of each word in the bird's name. Still, no mo fits the mockingbird in more than one way. It is also the exasperated cry of birders themselves when they're trying to hear a quieter bird anywhere near a mockingbird. Please, no mo. Often when I hear birdsong in the early morning, I will fling open our bedroom curtains expecting to see dozens of feathered messengers, only to discover it's just our resident wild-eyed, black-beaked guy yelling at full volume in his borrowed dialects. Mockingbirds have no decorum. They can't read the room. They do what they want. In a way, I envy them. Unlike the mockingbird, I don't tolerate uncertainty very well. Most of us don't. God knows all, sees all, holds all, but we glimpse only these little, often nonsensical seeming snippets of horror and glory. So we live in this world that is filled with grief and that is filled with uncertainty, which can bring its own types of grief. Scripture talks about wars and rumors of wars. Jesus says, you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. While I was writing this book, I woke up one morning to the news about a school shooting in Uvalde, Texas. And as a parent, as a grandparent, I'm not a grandparent, but I imagine for grandparents as well, those stories hit in a particular way. It was almost the last week of our children's school as I was writing the chapter on mockingbirds and having to think, it's the end of the year. They're not doing anything important. Do I send them? Of course I send them. But what if I send them? That uncertainty piece, that grief that hits the community, but also has these ripples that go out to the whole country, to the whole world, these nonsensical, massive tragedies. This is again from the chapter on mockingbirds. We wake to news that a gunman shot up an elementary school in Texas, a fourth grade classroom at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde. Each detail emerging is more horrifying than the last. Just last Sunday, I preached on Revelation 22, the tree growing in the city of God, with leaves for the healing of the nations. I told the story of Dr. John Chang, a family physician serving many of our congregants. Only a few days prior, Dr. Chang gave his life rushing a gunman who drove from Las Vegas to shoot down elderly Taiwanese worshipers in a Laguna Woods church barely 5 miles from ours. My voice broke as I looked into the eyes of those in our pews, many the same ages as those who were murdered. After the service, one of our seniors, a retired military man, put his arms around my neck, leaned in, and wept. But it's time for dinner. So I add salt to the rice and whisk together peanut butter and soy sauce and lime juice, garlic and ginger and pepper, and I watch my children through the window as they squabble and play on the backyard swing. I think of the children of Uvalde and of Dr. Chang as I saute onions and sausages. I pour water. I slice cucumbers as my heart tattoos a lament inside my chest. I think of one of the men of Irvine Taiwanese Presbyterian Church, Shoei Su, who acted heroically in the moment and later told the press, "At the time, we were not afraid. Later, when we think about it, we're afraid." Henry Nouwen once wrote that much of praying is grieving. Often my prayers and grief are indistinguishable. The ache in my chest is an offering to the God who created us for peace, and in its absence, to work for it within our homes and churches and communities. Jesus wept over Jerusalem, longing to bring healing and wholeness to a people not yet ready to receive it. We are so very violent. We are so very afraid. Pastoring bows me low many weeks with just the normal tragedies of congregational life. The college said no, the divorce is final, the cancer is back. But it has also taught me that stopping to perseverate will drain the energy I require to do the next thing God asks. So I stir our dinner in the skillet and breathe my grieving prayers in and out. I think of a character who reaches his end in Samuel Beckett's novel, The Unnameable. I can't go on, he says. I'll go on. At dinner time, our 3-year-old gets a splinter in her foot. We're eating outdoors at the picnic table, which is worn to roughness by sprinklers and the sun. We need to replace it or at least sand it down. I duck under the table to inspect her little foot, and there, nestled in the grass by a table leg, is the severed head of a mockingbird. Its feathers are matted with blood, its eyes partially eaten by maggots. Oh my, I say, and Daryl peers under the table. Is that a dead bird, he asks. Part of one. Bereft at the delay in care, Felicity erupts into tears of anger, howling her pain and the frustration that dessert will now be delayed by tweezers and hydrogen peroxide. I scoop her up and dry her tears, carrying her inside. We nestle on the bedroom floor so I can remove the splinter, thanking Jesus it isn't deep enough to require anything but a gentle pluck from outside her soft pink skin. I fill up the bathtub and set her gently in the warm water. Are you feeling any better? I ask. She nods. I head down the hall to the linen closet for a towel, and then I hear her sing. It's a song she learned in Sunday school. You gave me a heart. The sweet kazoo voice of my tiny child drifts from the bathroom, interspersed with sounds of quiet splashing. And you gave me a smile. You gave me Jesus, and you made me a child. She's learning this song at our church preschool, and a few of its words fascinate her. She pauses to splash for a few seconds. A child, she sings. Mom, a child. I begin to weep. Mom, she calls, come here for a second. I need the strawberry soap. I swallow hard. I'm coming, baby girl. So I booked the flight to see my grandfather, and there are stories in the book of the miracles that get me there on time. You never know with air travel how things are going to go, and a couple people really took mercy upon me, and I make it there to his bedside, and I end up at his bedside on the day he dies. And those bedsides, those places, those hospital rooms, those difficult moments, the Christian mystics like to call them the thin places. The places where the barriers between heaven and earth are so gauzy fine, you almost feel like you can see the Lord's presence. And it was an incredible time. My sisters were both there. They made it. They don't live close. Everyone had come back, and we were all around his bedside. And one of my rules for myself as an author is I only write my own story. So one of the things my dad said I had to put in the book that is not in the book, but I will share with you, because I was not in the room when it happened, was my grandmother was there. They'd been married 60 years, and my parents were there, and I'd stepped out for the moment. And my grandmother wanted to play some hymns for my grandfather, who was not religious. And so she had some hymns on YouTube, on her phone, and she set it on his chest, and these hymns were playing as he was nearing the end of his life, and it was Amazing Grace. And then it was How Great Thou Art. And then it was Little Drummer Boy. And everyone lost it. And those moments of lightness, even in the midst of grief, these moments of the sun breaking through the clouds just for a moment, it's one of their favorite stories. So I was at his bedside on the day he died, and then I had to go. I had a return ticket. I had to get back for Holy Week, and so I'm headed home with this tremendous bucket of grief, and I don't know what to do with it, and I don't know where to put it. And I'm in the airport trying to buy myself dinner, and the cashier has to ask me 3 times for payment, because grief makes us really foggy, doesn't it? It makes us really fuzzy. We often talk with people who are grieving in our church. We tell them, be careful, because you will be foggy, you will be fuzzy. You could step out into traffic, you could leave the stove on. Be so gentle with yourself. And so I have a chapter in the book about grief, and I connect it to this bird. Anyone know who this is? Albatross. Albatross, biggest wingspan of any bird on earth, up to 12 feet. Albatrosses are amazing. At the time I wrote this book, this was the one bird I had never seen in the wild, but I've since been to the Monterey Bay Aquarium, and it wasn't the wild, but I did get to see an albatross, and it changed my life. It was amazing. But I liken grief to albatrosses because they are these big, unwieldy, graceful birds. And I'm going to unpack that a little bit. Humans aren't the only animals who grieve. Dogs grieve, cats grieve, killer whales have been spotted pushing their dead calves around for days. Elephants and apes mourn. Birds do too. Take the albatross. We don't see many of these in Southern California, though occasionally a northern Pacific one will end up near Catalina or Coronado Island. They spend most of their lives far out at sea, hunting for prey over thousands of miles. This isn't in the book, but it's so fascinating. Albatrosses can actually fly for days because they're able to shut down one half of their brain at a time. So they turn this half goes to sleep and this half stays awake. It's amazing. As a mom of young children, I'm so jealous. The laundry would finally be done. Besides the weeks they spend nesting, they are completely pelagic. That means they're completely out at sea. Besides, when local birders manage to spot one that's wandered close to our shores, birds of this kind are known delightfully as vagrants. The message boards go bananas. Albatrosses commonly go months without touching land. They've been clocked flying at nearly 80 miles per hour. They stay aloft using dynamic soaring, a roller coaster technique that makes use of slower wind speeds at ocean level and higher ones above it to climb up and down without expending precious energy to flap their wings. Albatrosses fly as far as, guess how many miles on a single trip? What's a crazy amount of miles? 1,000 miles on a single flight. That's far. That can get you to almost to California from here. They return to nesting atolls no bigger than aircraft carriers after exploring thousands of miles of empty ocean. They're known to predict the weather, which is good because they exist in some of the most uninhabitable regions of the planet. Most albatrosses spend the majority of their lives at the 3 latitudes just above Antarctica, known to mariners as the roaring 40s, furious 50s, and screaming 60s. At these latitudes, regular winds blow across the open ocean at 30 miles per hour, and stormy ones up to 150. That's Category 4 hurricane speed for anyone keeping track. Or, as an albatross might put it, delightful weather. At age 8 or 9, the Laysan albatross mates for life after a lengthy courtship. Each pair lays only 1 egg per season, and raising their single chick to become self-sufficient can take up to 9 months. If an albatross chick dies, its parents will wait until the following year before mating again. If the male or female of a mated pair dies, the other will mourn for years, ignoring all possible new partners until they are ready to court again. Some never will be. Albatrosses commonly live 50 years or more. In fact, the oldest known bird currently on Earth is an albatross, a female named Wisdom who hatched in 1951 on Midway Atoll and is still, at a time of this chapter's writing, and actually still today, 3 years after the book came out, alive and laying eggs at 74 years of age. With the largest wingspan of any living bird, up to 12 feet, albatrosses are regal, powerful, and majestic, both in air and on the water. Ancient sailors revered them. Their name comes from the Arabic word for diver, and their order, Persiliformes, from the Latin for violent storm. Because they spend much of their lives so far out at sea, most nesting only on remote islands, scientists still have much to learn about them. There's a decent amount of disagreement over even the basics. There are between 13 and 24 species worldwide, and either 2 or 3 or 4 genera, possibly more, maybe fewer. There's an air of mystery around albatrosses, and I like to think they prefer it that way. Not every species wants to be a house finch. The albatross is best known in modern mythology as a curse of sorts, An albatross around the neck means an awkward and shameful burden. This idea comes from Samuel Coleridge's 1798 epic poem, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, where an albatross, then seen as good luck for sailors, is shot by the mariner with a crossbow, an act of violence that is immediately followed by a series of mishaps for the entire crew. The other sailors, angry with the mariner for his misdeed and their resulting misfortune, tie the dead albatross around his neck as a sign of his guilt. 12-foot wingspan. An albatross around the neck is not an inapt metaphor for grief. A massive deceased seabird, awkward and ungainly and gruesome and beautiful, bouncing against a person's chest, would make simple tasks arduous in the extreme. Sometimes I wish grief was as visible as an albatross necklace. It'd make us kinder, I think, or at least remind us to give one another space. So grief is a funny thing, and you've probably heard of the stages of grief. Those are kind of been made famous in pop culture, but what's interesting about the stages of grief is they were not about grieving the death of a loved one. They're actually about coming to terms with a terminal illness yourself. So some people will say, I don't know if I'm working through the stages of grief or if that's working for me. They weren't originally written for that, and grief is different for every person. We know that grief takes time, it takes gentleness, it takes courage, it takes community. So where do the birds come in for us for grief? This is a European robin. Fun birding fact is that when settlers first started to come over here from Europe, they saw birds that looked a little bit like birds back home, and they just named them the same things. So this European robin is in no way related to the American robin, and the American robin is actually in the thrush family, like wood thrushes and things like that. But here we are, this is what we do. They both have some orange. So that is what the original settlers decided to do, and many of them would write notes. There is an Indian word for this bird, or an indigenous word, but I can't figure it out, so we're calling it a robin. Okay, so where do the birds come in? The birds come in because God invites us into the book of nature, God's first revelation. Before any word of Scripture was written down, we had creation and God's good and beautiful book of nature, God's first revelation. Birds as feathered ministers of grace. One of the reasons birding took off during the pandemic was everyone was unsettled, everyone was afraid, there was a lot of uncertainty in the air, and then people would go outside and realize the birds are still being the birds. The birds are still singing, spring is still happening, things are still blooming, and it gave us hope. The same can be true for us in seasons of grief, that when we remember beauty surrounds us, it gives us a lift. I love what Frederick Buechner wrote in Listening to Your Life. This is the world. Beautiful and terrible things will happen. Do not be afraid. One theologian suggests that every time an angel shows up in Scripture and their first words to the person usually are, do not be afraid, that it can actually be translated, stop screaming. Because there are things to fear. And if an angel shows up in my living room, I'm probably going to have a moment. But it's this reminder, not that we should feel shame for having fear, but that because of the Lord's presence and goodness and grace, we need not fear. That the story is written, that the arc, as Martin Luther King once wrote, bends toward justice. So what can we do in seasons of grief? One of the best things we can do is go outside. We can go outside here. You guys live in paradise. Did you know that? It's amazing here. It's so beautiful. I told my husband I'm not coming home, and he was like, yes, you are. We'll just all have to come back. I got to bring the kids. But being outdoors has this incredible host of emotional, spiritual, psychological, and physical benefits that are proven. And it doesn't have to be a 10-mile hike. It can be 10 minutes in front of a window on a rainy day to let God minister to us. We got crickets. We got crickets in the house. Nature, it's everywhere. It reminds us that we too are part of God's good creation. It ministers to us. Every Lent, I lead a practice on social media and at my church called A Bird from the Lord. We're Presbyterians, so we always end our scripture readings with, "This is the word of the Lord, thanks be to God." So it's a play on that. But it's so fun because I have folks in my congregation who will say, "But there aren't any birds in my yard." And I say, just go try it. For 10 minutes a day, sit near a window or sit outside and wait to see what the Lord brings to you. And they come back the next week and they say, "There are birds in my yard." And I say, yes, we don't see what we're not looking for. But as we learn how to pay this holy attention, this divine attention, we become transformed. And as we begin to receive the gifts of nature as gifts of God, we are transformed. Kathleen Norris has a great new book out called Rebecca Sue about her sister. And in it she writes, "When you pay attention, you can turn any place into holy ground." So I lead A Bird from the Lord online during Lent, which is when I do it for other people, but I do it all year round on my own and don't post about it. That's for me. And I encourage you, if you can, 10 minutes a day, go out and see what the Lord brings you. And here's the other thing about grief. Tomorrow we're just doing happy stuff. We're just talking about hope. I promise. Thank you for sticking with me. But I want one final word about grief. This is from the end of the book. I have a chapter about love and pelicans, of course. Logically. I have found that death opens up new paths to love. It uncovers new grief too, hard and fast and always painful. But this I expected. We all know that death stings. The love, it feels like a gift. Memories of my grandfather stick to me like forest burrs. I find them when I'm brushing my hair, pulling on my jacket, unwinding my scarf. Stories I haven't summoned in years come unbidden and stay a while. I realize how much about him will now remain forever a mystery to me, but also how much more clearly I can see a rounded out picture of who he was and how he shaped our family. His story's ending allows me to love him tenderly in memory, in ways he didn't much allow in life. When we die, we return to the dust, but we also return to those who love us. I want to end with just a couple beginning birder tips. I know some of you are a 6 on the birding scale, and you have tips to share with us, which I would love to do during our Q&A if you have beginning birder tips to share with us. But I don't know why that search document is on there. I took a screenshot. That's what happens. My number one birding tip. So I'm an evangelist for 2 things in this life. One is Jesus. The other is the Merlin Bird ID app. Spread the word. So this app is totally free. You can download it on your phone, and it's run by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology up in Utica, New York, so the science is great. And one of the best things about this is it allows you to ID the birds you see in your yard. You can ID them by taking a picture, by doing a step-by-step, what size was it, what color, where did you see it. The best feature is it has a sound ID option. So you go outside and you push the Merlin sound ID button, and it will tell you that dawn chorus of 30 different birds. It'll begin to pick them out. And the first one out here will always be what? Red-winged blackbird. Yeah, the dial-up modem. But it's so great because as you get to know what's around you, as they pop up on your phone, you'll begin to recognize the songs, and then they start to be your friends, and then things change from there. Eugene Peterson was a birder, and he writes of learning the birds' names that my most memorable experience of this came in naming birds. I've known what a bird was from an early age and could name a few: robin, crow, sparrow. The ones I named I noticed, not the other way around. I was aware that birds were in the air and bushes and trees, but never paid much attention to them, and then I became a bird watcher. I learned to observe the birds, not just glance at them. Within a few weeks, I was seeing an enormous variety of birds and noticing how extraordinarily different they were from each other. And I began to be in awe of how much there was yet to know and how long a lifetime I would need to arrive at mastery and to regret my late start. A new world had opened up right before my eyes: colors, sounds, flight patterns, but it had always been there. Why was I now seeing? In large part through naming. So Merlin is a great tool. No in-app purchases or anything like that, so you can set your kids free with it, your grandkids, and they won't bring your phone back with $80 in charges. Whew, my daughter, man, she pushes buttons. We gotta watch her. Second recommendation is another free app from iNaturalist called Seek. And this one helps you to identify plants, insects, and animals. So this one is great because as you're getting to know birds, you'll read on Merlin, that bird is usually in a cottonwood tree, and then you'll think, what's a cottonwood tree? Seek will help you figure out where the cottonwood trees are. So great tools if you're starting out in birding. And then just wanted to end with one final little note from Saint Mary Oliver and her poem, Instructions for Living a Life. Pay attention, be astonished, and tell about it. So that concludes today. Here are a couple books for continued reading if you're interested, and I'm here for, I think, Q&A now. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Courtney. Does anyone have a question for Courtney or perhaps a comment? Yes, Steve.
Hi, Courtney, and thank you for coming. Do birds have vocal cords?
Yeah, that's a great question. So birds have what's called a syrinx, most species of birds, which is similar to our voice box, but a little bit more technical. There are some birds, some species of wren, for example, that have two voice boxes and can sing duets with themselves. So yeah, bird voice boxes are fascinating. And then there are some birds that don't. Vultures do not have a syrinx, so all they can do is kind of grunt and hiss. But most songbirds, that's how it works. Yeah, great question.
He's downloading the app.
Yes.
Oh, you had the other one.
Had the bird
But
one.
now you're getting
And there are
iSeek.
some,
Yes.
there are some
There you
fakey
go.
ones. There are some fakey ones out there, so do make sure you get the actual Merlin. If it charges you anything, it's not the right one. This one's totally free.
Anyone else? Yep, hold on.
How do you tell if you're hearing 17 different species or a mockingbird?
Yeah. That's when you have to start looking. Yeah. And often on Merlin, the mockingbird will show up at one point, and so you know he's there, and then you're like, okay, I actually have to put eyes on these birds, or it's just the mockingbird. But yeah, mockingbirds are amazing. They're astonishing. They are the most popular state bird of any bird, I think because they're so vocal and so visible. Texas, Oklahoma, a lot of southern states.
Does the mockingbird have a native song?
Yeah, that's a great question. They sort of do, but it's all a little. Mockingbirds, all birds, but mockingbirds in particular, have kind of regional accents. So there's not like one mockingbird song. They sound different in California than they sound in Ohio, because they pick up kind of the tones of whatever birds are native to that region. Yeah. By the way, my husband, who is not yet a birder, he's kind of birder adjacent, is so grateful that I'm here to talk to all of you about birds for a week so he gets a break from me talking to him about birds all the time. I'm like, this is payback for all the years of sports statistics, honey. Yeah.
Have you ever tried singing back to birds?
Yeah, you can. It's called pishing, P-I-S-H, pishing, and birders will do that when they're out in the field. They also sometimes will take Merlin and play a bird back. And there's some ethics around that. You don't want to do it if it's a rare bird or if it's a nesting bird because it can kind of disrupt their system. But like red-winged blackbird, you could go out there and play it back all day. But yeah, they'll respond to that. And one of my favorite things about hosting my birding podcast is I have on these, I've had Ken Kaufman and Amy Tan and these amazing ornithologists come on the show and they'll talk about a bird and then they start making the sound and it's so great. It lights me up every time to hear birders being like, it's the bobolink. You're like, oh.
Now that question reminded me of something. We live in a 55-plus community and we have a double pond.
Yeah.
And on one end, they're not there anymore, but there was black swans,
Yeah.
two, and the other end, two white swans. And the white swans are dumber than a stick. The black swans, I would hold my phone up and play music, and they would come over and listen for a while, then leave. And I found out that if I would play some classical music, they would sit in front of me as long as I played that music and watch me.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the most astounding thing I've
Yeah.
ever seen, because they're different,
Yeah.
blacks and white. The blacks are much more aggressive too, with they won't let the geese in that end of the pond, and the white ones, they do. But it is, I'm not really a birder, but I love nature, and I study things and people, and I'm amazed every day at things I see. And that's one of the most amazing things I've seen.
I love that. Yeah, bird species have different personalities, and then even within the species, like you think about if you have a German Shepherd, you can have a lot of different kinds of German Shepherds. Some are really gentle, some are really aggressive, and the same is true with birds. And they have different preferences. Some will really be comfortable with people or come closer if you're making a weird sound or you're doing some music. Yeah, it's really fun. It's a bottomless bowl of delight, really. You just keep eating.
Speaking of the bottomless bowl of delight, we have some of Courtney's books over at the bookstore, and I would like to be good with their time. They are set up and ready for us to head over that way if you would like to. We'll begin at 4:45, and for about a half an hour, Courtney will sign some books. And thank you for being here today. We look forward to seeing you back. Tell a few friends. Same time, same channel tomorrow. And also at 6:30 tomorrow evening, weather permitting, we will have a birding walk hosted by our speaker. So thank you very much for being here. Take care.